The VCT offseason has begun, and with it, Rostermania is just around the corner. We're going to see so much player movement over the next few months until the next season starts, so it's time to look at a bunch of different players that are going to be free agents this year, and talk about whether or not they're going to change teams, stay with their old teams, or get replaced entirely. So this is the board we have today. We have a list of a lot of players. Now every single player on this board is a player who has an expiring contract. Unless that player has an asterisk next to their name, that means that they don't have an expiring contract, but they have been told and announced publicly that they are exploring different options. Doesn't matter if that's because of the team's choice or the player's choice. If you have that asterisk, that means you are under contract and require a buyout. But if a player's name doesn't have that asterisk, then that means they are a free agent. They are going to be free to sign to whatever team they want. And of course, just because you are a tier 1 player this year does not necessarily mean that you have a guaranteed spot for next year. There is, of course, going to be a lot of tier 2 talent signed in this offseason because clearly that is a method that does work. Just looking at Energy, who brought in a bunch of tier 2 talent and just won champs. So clearly that kind of method works. So many of these players are going to not be able to find jobs and be on the outside looking in. But anyways, let's start with looking at the Americas, which has a vast selection of free agents, starting with an entire team of players that were allowed to explore different options because the team is going through an entire rebuild, and that is the 100 Thieves core. Cryocels, Asuna, Xander, EU, and Kess are all under contract but are allowed to explore different options. Boostio is the only one that is a free agent and won't require that buyout. And out of all these players, I definitely see Cryocels being able to get a tier 1 job. He was their team's best player, despite the team having a pretty mediocre year overall. Asuna, I'm not really sure. He's been on that team for a very, very long time, and the results just have not been there. I do think it is time for 100 Thieves to move on, so while they still technically have the option of bringing him back, same with Cryocell, so maybe Cryocell stays as well. I just don't see Asuna going back to this 100 Thieves roster. Will he get a tier 1 job somewhere else? It's possible, but I don't see it as a guarantee, but we will see. Xander, I would like to see get another shot at tier 1, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen. EU was one of the more consistent players, so I definitely see him being able to find a job. Kess only played for the team during stage 2, and while he had a solid start, he kind of fell off around the end of it, so maybe another team looks at him, maybe 100 Thieves bring him back, but I don't see it as a massive possibility. Boostio, after his individual performance, might have to fight his way through tier 2 to get back to tier 1, but there is always that shot of another team needing an IGL and believing in Boostio having a bounce back year, so we'll see what happens there. Then we have another group of players that is the majority of a team, and that is the G2 core, a core of players that have been together for a very long time at this point. Jonah, P, Valen, and Trent being a part of that guard core, Leaf coming in 2024 to this roster. So even though G2 had a very good year of making it to a grand final at Bangkok, as well as being the best team in the Americas until champions, they could go through a bit of a rebuild if even one of these players wants to go to a new team. I think everybody's going to get offers. I can see literally everybody getting an offer here. And also their coach in Josh RT also needs a new contract. I didn't put the coaches on the board for this one. That's a whole other discussion. Overall, I do see these players sticking together on G2. That team was very good, and I think that they would have another crack at a trophy if they were to stay together. So we'll see if all those players believe that as well. Moving on, we have a lot of players from the crew core now free agents. Basically everybody except their newest addition in Dante Deus. It's Shy, Kesnit, Melzer, and Mazzino. Now with Mazzino, he was recently announced to be looking for other options, but he is still under contract with crew until 2026, so he will require a buyout. Kesnit is supposedly stepping away from Valorant for a little bit. He said he's taking a break, but there did seem to be a little bit of a door open if something changes, if he feels like he wants to return later in the offseason or something, maybe he goes back to crew. He's a very long-standing member of this team. Even when he left, he came back very quickly. Had that very brief stint on Leviathan. People don't remember that, but I do. But if Kesnit wants to come back, I'm sure crew will probably give him a job, but I think he probably takes the year off, at least maybe half the year. Shy, I think, is a very solid player, struggles a bit to be consistent, but I do think he is good enough to play in tier 1. But the problem is with a lot of these players that if crew doesn't want to bring them back, then that's almost the entirety of the Latin American slots, because Leviathan basically already has their roster for next year locked in. We'll get to that in a bit, but they also haven't been putting a focus in building a Latin American team, opting for a more international roster, if you want to call it that. Anyways, with Melzer and Mazzino, Melzer I thought was pretty inconsistent at times over his time with crew. I think he's decent, but I don't don't know if I see him finding another tier 1 spot if he can't retain his position on crew. And right now that does not seem to be what's happening. There is also Mazzino, who was a big pickup for crew in the offseason. He had a really good year on Leviathan the year prior, but with Mazzino, I did feel like he was a little overhyped coming back into that roster. That was his second stint on crew. Maybe he gets another tier 1 spot. He does have the ability to play a pretty good level at tier 1, but we will see how that goes. Moving on, we have almost every player from the 2-game roster: Silence, Gobara, LZ, and Prize. Now, I would also have Spike on the board, but it's already basically confirmed that he is going to Leviathan, so that would have been a really good free agent pickup for whatever team, but he was snatched up very quickly. So aside from Spike, are any of the 2-game players going to be able to get another tier 1 spot? Silence, maybe. Gobara had some decent runs here and there. Prize already did play on a different Brazilian team and then went back to this team for stage 2. I don't really see any of these players being able to continue their spots in tier 1. They had a pretty unfortunate year. But hey, Furia is looking to rebuild the roster, and they're always looking for Brazilian players to which they can ruin their careers. There are 3 players from Evil Geniuses that are going to be free agents this offseason. Superman is the only one of those that is going to be an unrestricted free agent, whereas with Ye and Nature, it was just recently announced that Evil Geniuses is probably not bringing them back for 2026. So that is pretty unfortunate for Ye. I thought he had a pretty decent year given all things considered. He had some pretty decent moments, but it also felt like yet again he wasn't really put on the best roles for him, and Evil Geniuses just ended up having a pretty mediocre year overall. And that's also why it makes sense that Nature is also not returning to the team. He was this team's IGL, and while EG did have their moments, it didn't seem like he proved enough that he is like a top IGL in the league or whatever, so we'll see who they have to replace him. But at this point, I just don't see Nature getting a tier 1 spot, unfortunately. With Ye, I mean, maybe, but he's had a few kicks at the can now, so maybe he just has to go back to tier 2. Moving on, we have 3 players from Leviathan. So Leviathan are retaining both Sato as well as King, but Com, Tex, and Okeanos all have expiring contracts, and they will not be bringing them back. Apparently, what Leviathan is doing is they're bringing in Spike, as I previously talked about, but also bringing up some players from their academy team, and that does make sense, but that means there are going to be a lot of players that are either rookies or didn't even play a full year in the VCT. And while I was talking about bringing up tier 2 talent is a good idea and can work out for you, that doesn't mean that that's going to be a successful recipe for every single team. Com and Tex are players that did have their moments throughout their time on Leviathan and could find themselves on a different tier 1 team, but I would put it at maybe like a 40% chance for each of them. Okeanos, I am surprised that Leviathan didn't want to bring him back. While he wasn't a superstar or anything when he came into this team in stage 2, it's not like he had a bad performance or anything. He had some pretty clutch moments overall, so I'm kind of surprised they're not bringing him back, and he will be looked at by other teams. Moving on, we have probably the most surprising team on the board here. Now, this is a very interesting situation with MIBR. In terms of expiring contracts, they have 3, and that is Artson, Ospos, and Verno. But it was announced pretty quickly after their loss at Champions that both Genom and Cortesia are likely to be released from this team and are able to explore other options. Now, Artson was also a part of that news report, but he has an expiring contract, and while Artson did have his moments throughout 2025, I do think it does make sense from MIBR's position to maybe explore a different option than Artson. So I'm not really surprised at that one. Genom, I can kind of understand that as well. I thought he had a pretty decent rookie year, probably peaked in stage 1 and then couldn't maintain a lot of consistency overall, but I thought he was fine. But again, that's one that I can kind of get behind. But dropping Cortesia, that might end up being the biggest blunder of the offseason. I thought he had a great year. Even when this team was doing bad, he was this team's energy guy. He was the vibes merchant. He almost single-handedly won this team that game against 100 Thieves in stage 2. And while it was a bit overshadowed by Ospos's performance at Champs, I thought he had a pretty solid tournament. By the time MIBR lost that game to get kicked out of Champs, Cortesia was 3rd in the whole tournament in KD ratio. So I thought he was amazing, but apparently the plan is to keep the duo of Ospos and Verno and then rebuild the roster around those players. Now, while I can get behind that overall, I don't see why you wouldn't keep Cortesia. He proved enough. He had a very good rookie year, one of the best rookies in the entire VCT, and then you decide to let him talk to other teams, potentially go to another Brazilian team rival? That to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. And Ospos and Verno both have expiring contracts, so while obviously it's the priority for this org to keep both of those players have the option. They can leave if they want to. They don't require a buyout. they can do whatever they want. So they better hope that they can convince both Ospas and Verno to stay, and that they can get replacements for Genom, Artsin, and Cortesia that are formidable, because if they end up losing the entirety of their 2025 roster, that is going to be a massive blunder for an organization that finally found a way to be competitive in the VCT. So we'll see what happens there. I'm kind of smelling a bit of a disaster here, which would just be an absolute shame. I thought that team was pretty good. I thought they deserved another shot in 2026, but we'll see what happens. Moving on, we have two players from Energy, both Ethan and Som, the most recent world champions. They do have expiring contracts. I am kind of on the fence of how I feel about both of those players coming back for 2026. While they probably should come back, at least in my opinion, they definitely can play very well. They just won champs, and I do think that that team deserves another kick at the can. That was technically only a roster that was together since the beginning of Stage 2, but does Som decide that he wants to end on a high note and then go back to content creation? Does Ethan decide that it's time to retire? He's had a very long career in esports. Maybe it's time for him to step back. Maybe the champs win just makes him hungry for more trophies, so we will see what happens there. Then we get to three players on Sentinels. Now, Sentinels is going to be a very interesting team to watch in the offseason. People are already freaking out about scrims that are being leaked and the players that they're playing with, and Zekin's not there and John QT's not there. And I'm just like, listen, man, scrims really don't mean much at the end of the day. Like, it could just be they were playing with Qbert Academy players, which they were, and just trying different things out with different players. Maybe John QT and Zekin are just on a break or something. I really wouldn't put too much stock in what you see from the VCT Scrims account. Yes, it can say some things when we get kind of deeper into Rostermania, but at the same time, Sentinels do have an interesting decision here, because they're two players that they brought in for the 2025 season in both Narrate and Bank. They do not have expiring contracts, and neither does their sixth man in Redux, who is now old enough to play in the VCT and had a very good year on Qbert Academy. So I can definitely see Redux coming up, but then who does he replace? Do they keep both Narrate and Bane? I think if you ask Sentinels fans, that is not what they would like them to do. But at the same time, Zekin, Celsius, and John QT all have expiring contracts. Do any of them start looking for other options? Do they want more money than previously? Does any of that scare Sentinels away from signing them? Do they get offers from other teams that end up being a lot better? I just don't see it as a guarantee that all three of these players end up staying on this roster. I think the probable thing is that Sentinels do want these three players to stay, but again, who do you replace with Redux if you want him to come up? And with Sentinels falling short this year, do you think it's a good idea to run it back, or would that be not the best idea? But either way, I think all three players probably retain tier 1 slots. Zelsis, it is a discussion of does he end up retiring, but he has said that he is not retiring, but does that change if he doesn't get a spot on Sentinels for next year? It's going to be a very interesting offseason for Sentinels. We will see what they do. Then to end off the Americas, we have two players that were previously on Furia, Tui's and Paula. Both are still under contract, but are exploring other options. I don't know if either of them are going to get a tier 1 spot. Unfortunately, Furia just had probably the worst year in the VCT that any team has ever had, and that is saying a lot. So we'll see what happens there, but I wouldn't expect any of them to be there. And then to top it all off, we have Demon 1, who I put in DRG colors because I thought that was funny. Maybe his performance at Champs gave him a little bit of stock. He seemed to do at least pretty good, especially on a team that didn't even speak the language he speaks. So we'll see what happens there, but I do think Demon 1 probably goes to tier 2. Okay, so that is the Americas. Now it's time to move on to EMEA, who I think have more players. There are just so many different players on this list and some pretty big names as well. I wouldn't say there's as many hard hitters in this free agent class for EMEA, but definitely some interesting names. The runner-up team at Champs, Fnatic, have three players that they need to re-sign if they want to keep the same roster, and that is Boaster, Chronicle, and Crashies. Obviously, both Boaster and Chronicle, they're probably going to want to keep, and maybe they want to keep Crashies as well, but it does kind of sound like he might not be returning to this team. From his recent social media posts, it seems like a return to NA is kind of inevitable, and I can understand that he probably misses home. He is away from a lot of the things that are in his life back in North America, but at the very least, Crashies proved that he still can play at a very top level, being one of the only remaining players from that Optic Gaming roster in 2022 that is still playing to this day, and he proved that he can play at a high level. Was that just because of Fnatic and the system there? We will see. But Boasters and Chronicle, I don't see them going to a different team. They definitely get re-signed, but that is kind of where the discussions of Boaster, is he going to retire? That's obviously a discussion that's going to be around, but it definitely seems like he wants to play this year. Don't see why he wouldn't return. return. Then we have Magnum of BBL Esports. Now, BBL does seem like they're going through some other stuff as well. There's rumors that they have like financial issues and there's some like random controversial things happening there. I really don't know what's kind of happened with them, but they had a pretty good roster overall. But Magnum does not seem to be a part of the plan for next year. Does have an expiring contract. Haven't heard anything about him returning, and I don't know if he proved enough that he can get another tier 1 spot, but maybe he's been on a few tier 1 teams before. Then we have CNED of Foot Esports. Now, he did take most of the year off until stage 2, and it didn't really turn Foot season around. In fact, they kind of got worse. Not that that's really on CNED or not, but CNED, he's been around the block for a while. You know, he's won a Champions. He won the very first Champions, in fact, but I don't know if he's going to be a hot commodity in this offseason. Then we have Miniboo of Team Heretics. Now, it does seem like Team Heretics is probably keeping their roster that they've had for 2 seasons now, and that does make sense. They did win Esports World Cup, which was their first grand final win, and while they didn't convert that into a win in the VCT, they still managed to have a pretty good run at champs. Not including Toronto, they looked at least pretty good on the international stage, so we'll see if they run it back once again. I don't see Miniboo going anywhere else, especially because his brother is the IGL of that team, so it does make sense that he would stay there. Moving on, we have an interesting group of players here. 3 players from Giant X. Now, Giant X, of course, having that resurgence of a season in stage 2, being able to make it to champions, and a lot of that is thanks to these 3 players, Aura, Flickless, as well as Grabino. However, they only brought all 3 players on until the end of 2025. So while they probably would like to keep at least the majority of that roster, and Aura and Flickless did look quite good, and so did Grabino, which was pretty surprising, they all have expiring contracts, and if they can't keep Aura, Aura is going to get an offer from a different team. He had a fantastic stage 2 as well as champs. Didn't really do well in that last game that Giant X played, but let's just avoid that. But Aura and Flickless are rookie players that do have a lot of room to improve, and I'm sure that Giant X would like to keep them. We'll see if they're able to do that. And Grabino, a bit more of a veteran player, they probably give him another chance as well. But again, they're going to get offers from other teams. We'll see where these players go. Then we have 3 players from the Carmine Corp team, the team that did want it to make it to champions, but just could not do it. Being a French organization, that's got a stain. Martin, Sadak, and Pyrol are all free agents. Pyrol only playing for, I believe, 2 games for this organization, and Sadak, of course, coming over from the Americas, hoping to build a bit of a powerhouse in EMEA. It just did not work out. Is Sadak's time as a top IGL in the VCT past? Is it time for him to step back from the game and retire? Maybe. Or does he return to the Americas and have another shot at, say, a Brazilian team or a Latin American team? We will see. He is going to get offers, that I know for sure. And Pyrol, I mean, maybe gets an offer here, there, maybe gets some trials, but I wouldn't see that as a big possibility. Moving on, we have the entirety of the Koi roster that did play in 2025. Of course, everybody getting kicked off the roster because the team itself got kicked out of the VCT. Koi fans are still very mad about this. They are still in the replies of Leo Faria, and I mean, they didn't really care when their team was playing, and now they care a lot, so whatever, man, do what you want. But all those players that are going to be looking for new homes, Batty G, Monster, Flya, Filu, Natank, as well as Shados. Don't know if I see any of these players getting another tier 1 shot. Maybe Natank, I think he got a bit of the short end of the stick in 2025. Filu maybe showed some promise. Flya did have a pretty unfortunate year. Don't know if I see Shados or Batty G or Monster getting offers either. Moving on, we have 2 players from Na'Vi, a team that did almost make it to champs, but just fell short. Shio as well as Alexic. Angel, of course, retiring from professional Valorant, so he's not on the board, but Na'Vi is going to need 3 new players. Unless they end up keeping Shio and Alexic. I think Alexic did have his moments for this team. Shio had a bit of a rough stage 2, surprisingly, but hey, he's a veteran in Valorant. Maybe someone gives him a shot. Moving on, we have a Team Liquid player by the name of Kiko. Now, Kiko did have a very good year for Team Liquid, but Team Liquid did fall short at the international level every single time, losing in the group stage of Bangkok, Toronto, as well as champions, despite being contenders for champions. But I don't think Kiko was the main problem there. Maybe a bit of a lack of international experience didn't help him, but I would not say he was the problem for this team. Team Liquid are probably going to try to keep them, but do they look to make any other roster moves? And if they do, he would technically be the easiest because his contract is up. Moving on, we have the entirety of the Gentlemates roster. Now, Gentlemates were announced to be retaining their spot in VCT, taking over Koi's spot. So out with the Spanish team, in with the French team, but all of their roster from last year do have expiring contracts. And the team had a pretty abysmal year overall, so do any of these players end up getting another tier 1 shot? I do think Mini would be the most likely to get another shot at tier 1. He did have a pretty decent year. Zipan up and down. Kamic came in during stage 1, didn't really do too much for this team. Same goes for Comeback, I'm not even gonna try to say that. And then Proxy, whatever, man. They're probably not coming back to tier 1. I said their names wrong. Whatever, man. Speaking of teams that aren't going to be back in the VCT, the Apex roster, everybody there with expiring contracts. Avova, Molzy, Batinax, Hype, Penny, and Olazera. Again, this is a team that had a pretty bad year overall, so do any of these players get another shot? Penny is an America's import, so does he go back to the Americas and try to find a spot there? We'll see if any of these players get another kick at the can, but I'm not sure if I see it as very likely. Next up, we have 4 players who played for Team Vitality. Kix is the only unrestricted free agent, but some players that they brought in mid-season, Unfake, Kovac, and Psyoff. They are restricted free agents looking for different opportunities. Did they prove enough on Team Vitality to be able to impress some other teams? I don't really know, but we will see. So those are the 2 regions that have a ton of free agents. There's going to be so much movement in the Americas and EMEA, and there are still so many more players to be announced that are going to be looking for new teams. But when it comes to Pacific and China, a lot less. So this section of the video should be quicker. Starting with the Pacific, Mindfreak is probably going to be the top free agent in Pacific. While PaperX do have expiring contracts with Devi as well as something, I don't really see them leaving the team. This team just won Toronto and looked very good at Champs, just did not win it despite getting to top 4. But Mindfreak was of course the player that subbed out for Patman, so he probably has been looking for a while now. But I definitely see him getting another shot at tier 1. It wasn't a fact of he was like a terrible player or anything and they had to get rid of him. He was fine for this team. They just wanted to bring in Patman, so it makes sense that he was the one that went out. So we'll see which team ends up picking him up. It's going to be very interesting to see who ends up snatching him, but he should be a good pickup for wherever he goes. Moving on, we have the Gen G core. Now, Gen G having a pretty disappointing end to the year, not making it to champions after looking pretty good overall in stage 2. They just ended up having a pretty bad playoffs and also looked really dangerous at Toronto, but just ended up choking. And that seems to be the narrative that the team had in 2025, is they would have these big matches where they would need to win, but they would choke them anyway. So while they could get another kick at the can, they do have some big players to re-sign. Texture, Charon, and Munchkin all have expiring contracts. Munchkin also had an expiring contract last year and did end up re-signing with the team as soon as Rostermania started, so they were able to retain most of the roster that won at VCT Masters Shanghai, but the team just did not look the same in 2025. They tried to recapture some of that magic by bringing Lakia back, but he didn't play a game for them. They didn't play long enough in playoffs for, I guess, them to feel comfortable with throwing him in, but they only signed him until the end of 2025, so not really sure what happened there, but he is a free agent yet again. So we'll see if Gen G ends up trying to recapture that 2024 magic and bring back the entirety of that roster. They're going to have to prime Meteor from T1, so we'll see how that goes. But it isn't out of the air possibility that Texture, Munchkin, and Charon all look for new homes. They are going to get good offers from different teams. Moving on, we have 3 players from DFN, Akame, Janebon, and C's. I don't really expect DFM to bring these players back. The team was pretty bad overall, despite having some interesting moments here and there, but most, if not all of that, was due to their star player in May, so they're probably looking to build a new roster around him, and I don't know if I see any of these players being the solution to that. Next up, we have a DRX player by the name of Bane, who didn't play for most of the year on DRX despite being a part of the roster in 2024, but he did play at Champs, and that team just got top 3, so maybe he proved enough that they want to keep him. Is he going to be annoyed that he went kind of in and out of the roster? Does he look for a different opportunity somewhere? We'll see what happens there, but I do think DRX at least try to sign him, but I really just don't know what DRX are going to do with the roster day in and day out. It's always something new with them. Moving on, we have the only T1 player on the list, and that is Izu. Had a pretty good year overall, was a big part of that Bangkok run, but we'll see if he finds a new home or if he ends up staying on T1. I do think T1 is probably going to make some pretty drastic roster changes, so it is a probability that Izu does look for a new team. Next up, we have 2 players from Zeta Division in 1010 and CLZ. I hope that's how you say it. Zeta Division, pretty bad team, probably look at the main roster changes, probably not bringing these 2 back. Then we have RB, who did sign mid-season to Nonchim Red Force. Had a decent run overall, especially kind of by the end of stage 2, that team was starting to find their groove. So we'll see what happens at Ascension, because this team is going to be fighting for their spot to retain their Ascension slots. So maybe RB ends up being a big part of that run, and that improves his stock, either with the same team or a different team. He's another player that's been around for a while. We'll see what happens there. Moving on, we have China, who only only have a small amount of free agents, Knight being one of them of Billy Gaming. Billy, of course, having that pretty embarrassing out at Champs, so we'll see how they end up adjusting to that. Autumn is a player that's been on FPX for a minute now, FPX not having the year that they would have liked, so probably also looking to do roster changes. Maybe he's one of them. Moving on, we have Jake Kuro of JDG Esports. Don't know much about that team, don't know much about that player, so we'll see what happens there. Then we have 3 players from Nova Esports, and what are these names? We have CB, we have O, or is it O, or is it 00000? I don't know, man. You do you. Then they also have a player named Obone. We'll see if they end up returning to Nova Esports or if that team ends up changing the roster as well. Then we have a player with a normal name to say. We have Coco of Titan Esports. Titan Esports probably looking for a bit more oomph in the roster, so maybe he ends up being on the outside looking in. Next up, we have Martin of Trace Esports. Trace peaking pretty early in the year and then not finding their groove for the rest of it in either stage 1 or stage 2. So maybe they look at a roster change. Martin would be the easiest option, but maybe they bring him back and get rid of someone else. And the last 2 players we have to talk about are Juicy and YU of Wolves Esports. Both players are part of that pretty surprising run in Toronto where they got top 3, but then they fell apart in stage 2 and could not make it to champions. It is looking like Wolves are going to do a bit of a rebuild here. So that is the long list of VCT free agents that are going to be available, or at least mostly available, in the offseason. By the time I upload this video, there might already be massive changes, and some of these players are probably going to find spots either on the previous teams or new teams altogether. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think is going to happen with any of these players? Who do you think stays on their current team? Who do you think goes to a new team? Who's going to be the biggest surprise? Because there are going to be players that we don't expect to leave their team that will. Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys next one. Bye.